Louis Daguerre's photograph of the Boulevard du Temple, taken in 1837 or 1838, is a seminal work in the history of photography. It is often cited as one of the earliest examples of photography, the first image taken of a human being, and is a milestone in the development of the medium. This photograph captures a scene of everyday life in Paris, and as such, it has become an important historical document as well as a work of art. The Boulevard du Temple photograph was taken at a time when Paris was undergoing considerable change. The city was in the midst of a period of urbanization and modernization, and the boulevard itself was a prime example of this. The boulevard had been widened and paved in the early 19th century and was now a bustling thoroughfare lined with shops, cafes, and theaters. In the image you can see the Boulevard du Temple's twisting path, a stretch for the Parisian lower-class citizens to frequent, as it was loaded with theaters which would frequently run horror plays, resulting in its nickname Boulevard de Crime. Daguerre was familiar with this street. He had worked there as a stage designer at his Théâtre Comique, both a commercial artist and innovative technician. Daguerre invented the diorama, or three-dimensional model commonly employed as a staging device. At the same time, Paris was experiencing significant social and political upheaval. In 1830, the July Revolution had overthrown the Bourbon monarchy and established a new monarchy. However, this regime was also marked by political instability and social unrest, as various factions vied for power and influence. In this context, Daguerre's photograph can be seen as a reflection of the changes and tensions of the time. It captures a scene of everyday life on the boulevard, but it also suggests a sense of transience and impermanence. The figures in the photograph are frozen in time, but they also are on the move, caught during their daily routines and activities. It's a shame you can't actually see any of them. The scene was captured using a long exposure, about 5 minutes, so anyone walking through the scene wouldn't appear. They simply weren't standing there long enough for their image to be etched into permanence. Daguerre probably knew this and positioned the only visible people in the photo himself. If you look to the lower left of the image, you'll see someone getting their shoes shined. Blurry though they may be, they're the only ones who stood still long enough to be picked up by the long exposure process. So not only is it the first photograph containing a person, but the first containing two people interacting with each other. From a technical perspective, the Boulevard du Temple photograph is a remarkable achievement. It was taken using Daguerre's newly invented Daguerreotype process, which involved exposing a silver-coated copper plate to light and then developing the image using mercury vapor. This process produced highly detailed, highly contrasted images. The aesthetic qualities of the photograph are equally impressive. Composition is carefully balanced, with the figures and architecture arranged in a way that creates a sense of depth and movement. Leading lines are used as well, drawing the eye not only to the bright part of the building, but through the two figures transacting. The contrast between light and shadow is also striking, creating a dramatic effect that draws the viewer's eye into the scene. This wasn't the first photograph ever taken, though. That distinction goes back 10 years before and lies with Nicephore Niepce. Daguerre actually worked with Niepce under the guise he had been working on his own photographic process and could contribute to Niepce's experiments. But Daguerre had greatly exaggerated his achievements and how far along he was, and as it turned out, would be the one gaining a wealth of information from Niepce and not the other way around. After Niepce died suddenly a few years after their initial meeting, Daguerre went off on his own and further refined what he had learned from Niepce and came up with a new photographic process he called the Daguerreotype. His aim was to get the exposure time down to something a bit more workable. Niepce's process took hours to finish, while the Daguerreotype took only several minutes, up to 15 sometimes. Daguerre is believed to almost be a rival to Nicephore Niepce, but in that time, many believed Daguerre to be the person to first bring up photography. It was almost like a Tesla versus Edison situation. Daguerre knew he wasn't the first photographer because he worked with Niepce in person and knew about what he could create. It would take years for it to come out that the first photo was actually created by Niepce and his camera obscura process. But Daguerre also had a rival in the form of a man named Fox Talbot, who had invented another photographic process he called the daguerreotype. This was the precursor to modern film photography, which in turn made the daguerreotype obsolete. The daguerreotype didn't produce the first photo, but it was the first publicly announced method of photography. It was also a relatively simple process, and so became the first method widely adopted by fellow practitioners. Kings and queens would later pose for daguerreotypes, so it's a shame the boot black and the person having their shoes shine would forever be unknown. Whether Daguerre knew them and had them pose in the distance is unknown since their names are lost to history. Daguerre's invention offered a near-instant realistic rendering of the world, cracks and all, and even the most ignoble scene could match the appearance of the great masters. Daguerre first publicly announced his invention to the French Academy of Science in January of 1839, but that following March a fire would break out in his studio, nearly destroying all the prints and only leaving 25 behind. The images were then stored in a royal palace where they gradually began to deteriorate. While Daguerre's picture survived the bombings of Munich in 1940, shortly after the war, an impatient museum curator attempted to clean it. The mercury amalgamated to the silver, which was quite fragile. The hapless curator ended up wiping the whole plate clean. Fortunately, Beaumont Newhall, a photo historian, had commissioned a very high-quality photograph of it. From this, a replica daguerreotype could be made. Louis Daguerre is one of the 72 names inscribed on the famous Eiffel Tower in Paris in recognition of his contributions to science.